Hi everyone, thank you all for being here today to hear my talk, A Wild Grass Chase, Hybrid Beachgrass Discovery on the Pacific Northwest Dunes. The research I'm presenting today is part of the dissertation work I'm doing in the Department of Integrative Biology at Oregon State University with Dr. Sally Hacker and Dr. Felipe Barreto. So I study the Pacific Northwest coastal dunes. So 40% of the Pacific Northwest coastline is made up of sandy dune-backed beaches. And the ecosystem has changed dramatically in the past 150 years. So the native state of the Pacific Northwest dunes is something like that black and white photo in the background there. So these low, rolling, hummocky dunes, sparsely vegetated, very dynamic, and vegetated by this diverse array of plants. However, in the early 1900s, two beachgrass species were introduced in order to stabilize that shifting sand environment. And through a positive feedback loop between grass growth and sand deposition, these beachgrasses built tall, linear, stable dunes that are densely vegetated and have really low plant species diversity. These ecosystem engineering beachgrasses then spread outside of the areas where they were initially planted and have invaded nearly all of the Pacific Northwest coastal sandy beaches. Just to give you a sense of the scale of that change, on the left we have photos from before beachgrass introduction or early introduction, and on the right we have more modern photos. And what I want you to notice is just on the left there's all this white open sand, and then on the right there's tons of green linear dunes. And the other thing to notice is that the coastline is not just now densely vegetated, but also densely populated. So there are two species of invasive beach grasses on the Pacific Northwest coast. One is Ammophila breviligulata, American beachgrass, and that beachgrass was predominantly planted in Washington, and so that's where it's mostly dominant now. And the other beachgrass is Ammophila arenaria, or European beachgrass, and that grass was predominantly planted from northern Oregon down into California, so that's where it's the dominant grass now. And their ranges overlap in northern Oregon and southern Washington. And this is likely the only place in the entire world where these two beach grasses co-occur on dunes together. So there have been some significant positive consequences for human development of this beachgrass introduction. Beachgrasses increase coastal protection and increase sand stability. However, there have also been some significant negative consequences for biodiversity and species conservation. The beachgrasses outcompete native plants and decrease plant species richness, and they also decrease habitat for the western snowy plover and other native birds. And the two different species of beach grasses have differential effects on these ecosystem services that I listed. So because of a feedback between grass growth form and dune shape, Ammophila arenaria tends to grow more densely and therefore builds these taller, steeper dunes. Whereas Ammophila breviligulata tends to grow less densely, and because of that, tends to build these shorter, wider dunes. And Ammophila breviligulata dunes also tend to have lower plant species diversity than those dominated by Ammophila arenaria. So in 2012, a member of the Hacker Lab was out surveying the beach and found a beach grass with intermediate morphology and intermediate phenology. It was originally found in Long Beach, Washington, and then later found at 3 more sites in Washington and Oregon. And so immediately the question that comes to mind when somebody finds sort of an intermediate looking plant is this weird looking thing a hybrid? And so that question, is this weird looking plant a hybrid, has taken up the first couple years of my dissertation work. So the ways that I sought out to answer that question was I looked at the morphology of the plant, so what does it look like? Then I looked at the phenology, when does it flower? Then I investigated the genome size, and finally did some SNP genotyping. So for the morphology, we collected hundreds of plants of both the hybrid and the two Ammophila parent species, and we measured a huge suite of traits for those plants. And what we found is that the hybrid is intermediate between the parent species for some traits, but it exceeds its both parent species for other traits. So for example, ligule length is a trait that's just really important for identifying the hybrid and the parent species, and that's what I have pictured here on the slide. And the hybrid has an intermediate length ligule when compared to the parent species. But then there's other traits like the shoot height. So that's just the total height of a plant. And for that trait, the hybrid actually exceeds both parent species. So it's much taller than the parent species. And that's a trait that's actually really important for dune building potential. So at the end of the day, we found that the hybrid looks different from the parent species, and we can quantify those differences. Next, I looked at the phenology, so the flowering time of the hybrid. And to do this, I visited 4 sites every 2 weeks and surveyed the number of flowering stalks in the survey area. And what I found on the x-axis, I'm showing here the date of the survey, and on the y-axis, the density of flowering stalks. So here's just Ammophila arenaria. It turns out that Ammophila arenaria flowers first in the Northwest. It has a peak flowering around early July. Next, Ammophila breviligulata flowers sort of in late August is the peak flowering time for Ammophila breviligulata. And then if I layer the hybrid on top, you can see the hybrid has a different flowering peak than either parent species, but the flowering overlaps with both parent species, leaving the possibility open here for some backcrossing between the hybrid and the parents. Next, I looked at the genome size of the hybrid. So we just estimated the genome size using flow cytometry in the lab of Dr. Ryan Contreras at OSU. And we found that the hybrid has almost exactly an intermediate sized genome between the 2 parent species. This is pretty compelling evidence that what we're looking at is a first generation hybrid cross between the 2 parents. And finally, we did some SNP genotyping. So without getting into the weeds, this is a plot that sorts individuals, which are each of those columns, into different colors, which represent populations. So you can see that all of the Ammophila arenaria columns or individuals are being sorted into the red population. All the Ammophila breviligulata columns or individuals are being sorted into the blue population. And the hybrid, each individual is being sorted half into the Ammophila breviligulata population and half into the Ammophila arenaria population. So this is exactly what we would expect for a first generation hybrid, and is very compelling evidence that what we're looking at is a hybrid. So when we add all of those observations together, including about morphology and phenology and cytology and genetics, what we find is that the Ammophila beach grasses are in fact hybridizing on the Pacific Northwest coast. And this discovery comes with a number of potential sort of massive consequences. So some potential consequences are about coastal protection. How might this hybrid change the dune shape, and how could that potentially impact the protection that those dunes offer to coastal communities? There are other potential consequences for biodiversity conservation. How will this hybrid interact with native plants and animals? And then we have questions about the sort of population genetics or backcrossing with parent species and the potential ecological interactions. Now to really, and because science is so iterative, right, we've come up with this discovery, now we have a million more questions. So one very important question that we have is just how much of this hybrid is out there? To really get at any of those potential consequences that I just listed on the last slide, we really need to dig into this first question here. How much of the hybrid is out there? Where is it, and how much is there? So for the last little bit of the talk, I'm just going to summarize what we know about the range of the hybrid and how I'm trying to figure out more. So I showed you this graph before, or this map before, showing the range overlap between the 2 parent species. So we're zooming in on that range overlap, and all the purple dots are sites where I've already found the hybrid. So I've already found the hybrid between Ocean City, Washington, and Pacific City, Oregon. So this is a big stretch of coastline where the 2 Ammophila beach grasses overlap. However, you might notice there's some large gaps in this map, specifically between Fort Stevens and Pacific City, or along the Long Beach Peninsula. And so to fill in this gap, I am partnering with the Ocean Shores Conservation Coalition to try to harness the power of community or citizen science to search these beaches for hybrid beach grasses. We're hosting this search on the iNaturalist platform, which is a social network that connects people to the natural world and allows people to generate valuable biodiversity data. I've built a project page on iNaturalist, and we're sending people out onto the beaches to try to identify these beach grasses and hopefully to find a hybrid. Now this project rolled out this spring, so you can imagine it didn't go exactly as planned, but we did in fact have a volunteer identify a new hybrid population. So I'm going to leave it there. If you would like to get involved, I would love to have your help searching the beaches for this hybrid beach grass and also identifying the parent species on the dunes. So I'll drop the iNaturalist link at the very end of the talk. So thanks to all of the people who have been involved in this project, undergrads to professors, and thanks to the many funding sources who have made this work possible, including OSU and Sea Grant. So I'll just close, say thanks to everyone for listening, and please come to the question and answer session and go out and search for the hybrid. Thanks, everyone.